A nation was erased, its flag vanished, its king was gone. Yet somehow, its people never stopped living as if it still existed. Welcome to Okinawa. Japan is famous for speed. Okinawa is famous for slowing time. 66 years ago, this string of islands wasn't part of Japan at all. It wasn't part of any nation the modern world would easily recognize. For centuries, it existed in a space between empires, paying tribute to China, bowing to Japan, yet belonging entirely to itself. What most visitors never notice is that Okinawa's flag, its language, its gods, and its sense of time all descend from a country that no longer exists. A kingdom erased from maps, but not from memory. Long before Tokyo became the beating heart of Japan, Okinawa was the capital of something else. A maritime nation that traded with Korea, Siam, and the Ming court, absorbing customs from each without surrendering its own. Sailors called it the Ryukyu Kingdom. Historians call it one of the most quietly influential trading powers in East Asian history. But that isn't what makes Okinawa extraordinary. What makes it extraordinary is what happened to that identity once the kingdom was gone. Annexed, renamed, folded into a nation that viewed it as peripheral, exotic, almost foreign. And yet, walk through an Okinawan village today, and something strange becomes clear. The customs never fully disappeared. They went underground, into songs, into food, into the rhythm of daily conversation, unhurried in a country obsessed with punctuality. Researchers eventually discovered something they hadn't expected. The erasure of a nation doesn't necessarily erase its people. Sometimes it makes them hold on tighter. So the question isn't simply what Okinawa is today, it's what Okinawa refused to stop being. Because before there was a Japan that swallowed this island whole, there was a kingdom, proud, independent, and utterly unlike anything else in the region. A kingdom whose story doesn't begin with conquest, it begins with a crown. To understand Okinawa, you first have to understand something it lost. A kingdom that once ruled these waters, with a grace history rarely allows small nations to keep. The Ryukyu Kingdom didn't rise through conquest, it rose through connection. For nearly 450 years, its ships moved between China, Korea, and Southeast Asia, carrying porcelain, silk, and something rarer, the ability to belong to everyone without being owned by anyone. What most people never realize is that this tiny kingdom paid tribute to China's emperor and still governed itself entirely on its own terms. A delicate balance, a diplomatic tightrope walked for centuries. At its center stood Shuri Castle, not a fortress built for war, but a palace built for negotiation. Red lacquered halls, dragon carvings facing the sea, architecture that borrowed from China, yet answered to no one but its own king. Then something unexpected happened. The kingdom's own openness, the very trait that made it thrive, became the reason it couldn't defend itself when larger powers closed in. When Japan's Meiji government dissolved the monarchy in 1879, there was no war, no dramatic battle for the world to remember. Just paperwork, a quiet erasure disguised as reform. Historians call it the Ryukyu disposal. Locals still call it something closer to a wound. If a place can lose its name, its flag, and its throne in a matter of months, what does it take for a people to still remember who they were? That question sits underneath every conversation happening in Okinawa right now. If you've ever felt connected to a place your history books barely mention, tell us in the comments. The kingdom was gone, but its people were still there. And what came next would test whether an identity can survive without a nation to hold it. Most conquests arrive with cannons. This one arrived with a decree. In 1609, long before the Meiji government dissolved the Ryukyu throne, a different kind of invasion had already begun. The Satsuma domain, a powerful feudal clan from southern Japan, sent warships into Ryukyu waters, not to destroy the kingdom, not to burn Shuri Castle to the ground, but to own it quietly, from the inside. What happened next was unlike almost any other conquest in Asian history. The Ryukyu Kingdom was allowed to continue existing. Its king still sat on his throne, its merchants still sailed their trade routes, its people still performed their rituals. But behind the ceremony, Satsuma controlled everything: the taxes, the trade, the silence. For over 250 years, the kingdom functioned as a puppet state, performing independence for China's benefit while secretly funneling wealth north into Japan. Here is the contradiction most historians find extraordinary. Okinawa was simultaneously a tributary of China and a possession of Japan. Two empires, one small island, a people caught between both, pretending neither was true. That kind of pressure doesn't break a culture immediately. It bends it, slowly, quietly. And something strange happens when a people are forced to perform their own identity for outside audiences. They begin holding certain things back, protecting the deepest parts of themselves from the very powers that think they own everything. The songs sung in private, the prayers spoken in languages neither Tokyo nor Beijing could fully decode, the knowledge passed between women in courtyards while soldiers watched from the gates. Which raises a question history rarely asks. When everything visible is controlled, where does a culture actually live? The answer was hiding in plain sight, and it had a name most outsiders would never hear pronounced correctly. By 1972, the American flag finally came down. The Japanese flag went back up. On paper, Okinawa had returned home. But paper doesn't erase 27 years of a different life. What visitors rarely notice today is that reversion didn't feel like liberation to everyone who lived through it. For some, it felt like trading one set of outsiders for another, a homecoming that never fully arrived. Because underneath the new flag, something remained that still shapes daily life on the island. American military bases, dozens of them, covering a staggering share of Okinawa's usable land, concentrated on an island that makes up less than 1% of Japan's total territory, yet hosts the overwhelming majority of its US military presence. Here's the detail that surprises most outsiders. Fighter jets still roar over school playgrounds. Fences still separate farmland from runways. For many Okinawans, the sound of low-flying aircraft isn't background noise. It's a daily reminder of a decision made in Tokyo and Washington, not in Naha. So Okinawa exists in a strange, layered identity. Japanese by nationality, Ryukyuan by ancestry, shaped by American presence it never fully chose. Three histories, one small archipelago, and a population that has learned to hold all of them at once. But here's what makes this more than a political story. This tension didn't destroy Okinawan culture. It forced it to become something entirely its own. A hybrid rhythm of life found nowhere else in Japan. Language, food, music, and even humor carry traces of every era the island has survived. Which brings up a question worth pausing on. How much of who we are comes from the places that shaped us, even the ones we never asked to be shaped by? If that resonates, drop a comment, because the next layer of Okinawa's identity reaches even further back than war or occupation. It reaches into who actually held power on this island, long before any flag arrived at all. And the answer isn't what most people expect. Long before kings sat in Shuri Castle, before soldiers or bases or borders, Another kind of authority quietly ruled these islands, and it wasn't held by men. What most visitors never learn is that traditional Ryukyuan spiritual power belonged almost entirely to women. Priestesses, not priests. Grandmothers, not generals. In the old religious order, men governed the land, but women governed something considered far more important: the connection between the living and the divine. At the center of this system stood a role unlike anything in mainland Japanese tradition: the Noro, village priestesses responsible for communicating with ancestral spirits, blessing harvests, and protecting entire communities through ritual rather than rule. Then, there was a position even higher: the Kikoe Ogimi, the supreme priestess of the entire kingdom, spiritually outranking the king himself. Historians still find this strange, because in most monarchies of that era, spiritual authority answered to political power. In the Ryukyu Kingdom, it was often the reverse. Here's what makes this even more remarkable. This wasn't a temporary cultural phase. It shaped island life for centuries, embedding a quiet reverence for women's spiritual authority into everyday Okinawan tradition, one that never fully disappeared, even after the kingdom fell. Walk through certain villages today, and you'll still find older women performing rituals passed down through unbroken maternal lines, honoring ancestors in ceremonies few outsiders are ever invited to witness. In a region often associated with rigid patriarchal tradition, Okinawa quietly built something different: a spiritual world where grandmothers held more sacred authority than kings. Which raises a question worth reflecting on. How many places around the world hide extraordinary histories simply because they were led by women whose stories were never written down? If this surprised you, let us know in the comments, because this same reverence for elder women may hold a clue to something scientists have spent decades trying to explain: why Okinawan women, in particular, live extraordinarily long lives. But the island's respect for its elders wasn't only spiritual. It was about to become something the rest of the world wanted to understand. There is a sound in Okinawa that most visitors never hear, because most of the people who still speak it are over 70 years old. It isn't Japanese. It only sounds like a distant cousin of it. What most outsiders assume is a regional dialect of Japanese is, according to linguists, something far more significant: a separate language entirely. Uchinaguchi, one of several distinct Ryukyuan languages that developed independently for centuries before Japan ever claimed these islands. Here's the detail that surprises even native Japanese speakers. A person fluent in standard Japanese cannot understand Uchinaguchi without study. Different grammar, different vowels, different rhythm entirely. UNESCO has classified it, along with several other Ryukyuan languages, as definitely or severely endangered. But how does a language survive a kingdom's fall, a devastating war, and decades of occupation, only to nearly vanish in peacetime? The answer is uncomfortable. After reversion to Japan in 1972, and for decades before that, Okinawan children were often discouraged, and at times punished, for speaking their native language in schools. The result was a generational break so severe that many Okinawans under 50 understand only fragments of what their grandparents speak fluently. Then, something unexpected began happening. In recent years, a quiet cultural movement has emerged. Young Okinawans relearning the language of their grandparents, not from textbooks, but through folk songs, oral history projects, and community classes determined to keep the language from disappearing entirely. Here's what makes this urgent rather than sentimental. Linguists warn that when a language dies, it doesn't just take words with it. It takes ways of understanding the world that cannot be fully translated. Proverbs about the sea, expressions for grief, concepts of time that don't exist in Japanese or English. Which brings up a powerful question. How much of a culture's soul lives inside the words no one else can translate? If you've ever heard a phrase in your own family's language that simply doesn't exist anywhere else, tell us about it in the comments. Because Okinawa's story isn't only about what was taken, it's also about what people are still fighting, quietly and stubbornly, to keep. And that same quiet resilience is about to reveal itself in something far more physical, the land itself. Most people picture Japan as neon skylines, snow-capped mountains, and bullet trains slicing through gray winters. Okinawa breaks that picture entirely, because geographically, Okinawa has almost nothing in common with the Japan most travelers imagine. It sits closer to Taiwan than to Tokyo, a subtropical archipelago of over 150 islands scattered across turquoise water, where winter rarely dips below 15 degrees Celsius. What most first-time visitors don't expect is the color. Coral reefs so vivid they look digitally enhanced. Beaches with sand fine enough to feel like powder. Forests thick with subtropical species found nowhere else in Japan, some found nowhere else on Earth. Here's a detail that surprises even seasoned travelers. The northern rainforests of Okinawa, known as Yambaru, are so ecologically distinct that scientists consider them one of the most biodiverse regions in the entire country. A flightless bird lives here. A venomous pit viper, found only on these islands, slithers through its undergrowth. Species that evolved in isolation, cut off from the mainland for millions of years. But the ocean is where Okinawa truly separates itself from the rest of Japan. Warm currents flowing up from the Philippines create some of the healthiest coral ecosystems in the Pacific. Reefs that support sea turtles, manta rays, and fish, in colors that seem almost designed rather than evolved. Then comes the detail that changes how people see this place entirely. This isn't simply a beautiful backdrop for tourism. For Okinawans, the ocean has always been sacred, a source of food, spiritual belief, and identity stretching back to the maritime kingdom this documentary began with, which raises a question worth considering. How differently would we treat the natural world if we saw it the way Okinawans traditionally have? Not as scenery, but as something alive and worthy of reverence. If you've ever felt that kind of connection to a landscape, share it in the comments. Because paradise, in Okinawa, isn't only about how the island looks, it's about how differently time itself seems to move here. In Tokyo, trains apologize if they arrive 20 seconds late. In Okinawa, an appointment might begin whenever it feels right to begin. Locals have a name for this: Uchina time. What visitors from mainland Japan often find charming and occasionally maddening is that punctuality here operates on a completely different philosophy. A meeting scheduled for 3 o'clock might realistically start at 3:30. No one apologizes, no one seems bothered. It isn't laziness, it isn't disorganization. Anthropologists who've studied the phenomenon describe it as a cultural remnant of an older, pre-industrial rhythm, one where time was measured by tides, seasons, and community needs, rather than clocks and schedules. Then comes the detail that reframes the entire idea. This same relaxed relationship with time appears again and again in the research surrounding Okinawa's most famous distinction: its extraordinary rate of longevity. Chronic stress, researchers have long established, accelerates aging and disease. A culture that never fully adopted the anxious urgency of modern life may have unknowingly protected itself from one of longevity's biggest enemies. Local wisdom has its own term for this philosophy: nankuru naisa, an Okinawan phrase roughly meaning "it will work out, somehow." Not resignation, not carelessness. A deep, culturally embedded trust that worry accomplishes less than patience does. Sit in an Okinawan cafe for an hour, and you'll notice something else entirely. Elderly neighbors greet each other slowly. Conversations aren't rushed toward a point. People seem to occupy time rather than race through it, a rhythm strikingly different from the calculated efficiency associated with mainland Japanese culture. Which brings up a question worth asking yourself. If your daily life ran on nankurunaisa instead of urgency, what would change first? Tell us in the comments. And in Okinawa, this same unhurried philosophy extends into something even more surprising: the way people eat. Because what's on an Okinawan plate isn't simply food. For decades, researchers have called it something closer to medicine. For most of the world, food is fuel. In traditional Okinawa, food was closer to prayer. There's an old saying still repeated by elders here: "Nuchi gusui," medicine for life. What most visitors don't realize is that this isn't a marketing phrase invented for tourists. It reflects a genuine philosophy passed down for generations. The belief that what you eat directly shapes how long and how well you live. Traditional Okinawan cuisine looks almost nothing like the sushi and ramen associated with mainland Japan. The historic diet centers around purple sweet potatoes, bitter melon, seaweed, tofu, and modest portions of pork, eaten slowly and often shared. Then comes the detail that caught the attention of scientists worldwide. Researchers studying the island in the late 20th century discovered that elderly Okinawans following the traditional diet had dramatically lower rates of heart disease, certain cancers, and cognitive decline compared to almost anywhere else studied on Earth. The findings became so significant they helped inspire an entire field of longevity research. But here's what surprises people most. It wasn't about restriction. Okinawan elders weren't counting calories or eliminating food groups. They followed something called hara hachibu, a practice of eating until roughly 80% full, stopping before the point of fullness rather than after it. A simple habit, a profound difference. Nutritionists today still reference this principle when studying portion control and metabolic health, decades after Okinawan grandmothers were already living by it instinctively. As younger generations shifted toward Western fast food and processed convenience meals, health researchers noticed something troubling. Obesity and heart disease rates among younger Okinawans began rising, in some measures surpassing national Japanese averages. The very diet that made this island famous is quietly disappearing from its own dinner tables, which raises an uncomfortable question. Can a place be world famous for a lifestyle its own youngest generation is walking away from? Tell us in the comments if you've noticed this same shift in your own family's food traditions. But diet alone still doesn't fully explain what happens next, because when scientists dug deeper into Okinawa's longevity, they found something even harder to measure than nutrition. Diet explained part of the mystery. It never explained all of it. By the 1990s, Okinawa had become one of the most studied populations on Earth, and scientists were running out of conventional explanations. At one point, this small chain of islands recorded some of the highest concentrations of centenarians anywhere in the world, people living past 100 years old at rates several times higher than most industrialized nations. Okinawa became one of the founding regions in what researchers now call the world's blue zones, places where extreme longevity isn't rare, but expected. Here's what surprised scientists most. It wasn't only that Okinawans lived long. It's that they lived long without the frailty typically associated with advanced age. Elderly Okinawans in these studies showed remarkably low rates of heart disease, dementia, and disability, many remaining physically active and mentally sharp well into their 90s. Then researchers found something even stranger. Genetics played a role. Certain gene variants linked to longevity appeared more frequently in the Okinawan population than almost anywhere else studied. But when researchers tracked Okinawans who moved abroad and adopted Western lifestyles, That genetic advantage seemed to fade. Their lifespans dropped toward the average of wherever they resettled. Genes alone couldn't explain it. Environment mattered. Culture mattered. The rhythm of daily life mattered. Here's the detail almost no one expects. Physical activity in traditional Okinawan life wasn't structured exercise. It was farming, walking, gardening late into old age, not as hobby, but as identity. Many centenarians studied were still tending small gardens well past 90. Movement woven into daily purpose, rather than treated as a separate task. And that word, purpose, kept appearing again and again in the research. Okinawans have a term for it, ikigai, roughly translated as the reason you wake up in the morning, not a grand life mission. Often, something small, a garden to tend, grandchildren to teach, a community role to fulfill. Which brings up a question worth sitting with. If longevity isn't only about diet or genes, but about having a reason to keep going, what is your own ikigai? Tell us in the comments, because the next layer of this mystery reveals something researchers almost missed. It wasn't just what Okinawans ate, or how they moved, or even their sense of purpose. It was who surrounded them while they lived it. Diet explained one part of the mystery. Purpose explained another. But researchers kept finding something they couldn't measure with a blood test. A safety net that had nothing to do with money. It's called moai, a small group of people, often bonded since childhood, who commit to supporting each other financially, emotionally, and socially for life. Some groups have met regularly for over 80 years, not by convenience, but by lifelong obligation. Then researchers noticed something that changed how they understood longevity itself. Loneliness carries health risks comparable to smoking. Okinawa's social structure had, almost by accident, engineered a defense against exactly that. Do you have a group of people who would show up for you decades from now, the way they did decades ago? Tell us in the comments, because paradise, as the next chapter reveals, was never entirely safe. Every paradise carries a contradiction hiding just beneath its surface. Okinawa's is impossible to ignore once you know where to look. The same turquoise waters that draw millions of visitors are warming faster than almost any comparable reef system in Japan. Coral bleaching events, once rare, now occur with a regularity marine biologists describe with barely concealed alarm. Reefs that took thousands of years to form have lost significant portions of their coral within a single decade. Tourism, surging in the years before the pandemic, brought a familiar paradox. The very things that make Okinawa extraordinary began attracting crowds large enough to quietly diminish what made it special. Then, there is the presence of US military bases, generating real local opposition. Not ideology, but lived reality. Noise, contamination, land that could serve agriculture or conservation, locked behind fencing for generations, decided by governments whose citizens will never hear the jets over an Okinawan school at 7 in the morning. Who gets to decide what a place sacrifices for someone else's security? There is a hill in southern Okinawa where the ground still gives way beneath your feet. Not from erosion, from what lies underneath it. Decades after the battle ended, farmers still uncover human remains, Japanese, American, Okinawan, intermingled in soil that absorbed one of the most catastrophic concentrations of violence in the Pacific War. Okinawan men were conscripted into military service, often with minimal training. Women and teenage girls served as battlefield nurses, moving through underground cave hospitals as shelling collapsed the world above them. Some of those four still exist, sealed, walls bearing the marks left by people who spent their final days inside. Okinawans didn't inherit a simple narrative of heroism. They inherited the memory of being caught between two armies, sacrificed by one, defeated by the other. Every June 23rd, Okinawa observes Ire no Hi, a day of remembrance honoring not victory, not defeat, but the fact of all those lost. When history remembers a war, whose grief does it choose to count? By the early 2000s, international media had crowned Okinawa a great longevity destination. The world had decided what it was, and it wasn't entirely wrong. But it wasn't entirely right, either. Okinawa remains one of the poorest prefectures in Japan, despite sitting at the top of global wellness conversations. A significant portion of its economy depends on the American military presence much of its population actively opposes. Base-related jobs creating a dependency that makes resistance genuinely complicated. Protest the bases, risk the income. For many families, that isn't abstract. It's Tuesday morning. The same tourism generating badly needed revenue is eroding the culture that made Okinawa worth visiting. Elderly survivors, who rebuilt villages and kept the language alive, now watch their grandchildren consume a version of Okinawa packaged for outsiders, while the lived version quietly fades. When the world falls in love with a place, does that love protect it or slowly consume it? Tell us what you think in the comments. Okinawa has been erased from maps, occupied by empires, devastated by war, and reshaped by the tourists drawn to its peace. And still, something in it refuses to disappear. A new generation is learning the old language their grandparents were once forbidden to use. Farmers are replanting the sweet potato their great-grandparents relied on. The moai, adapted for modern life, still binds strangers into lifelong circles of care. None of it was guaranteed. A kingdom without an army could have vanished into footnotes. A dying language could have gone silent. It didn't, because Okinawa kept deciding, quietly, what was worth carrying forward. Longevity here was never really about diet or genetics. It was about who a person refuses to let grow old alone. Okinawa discovered, long before the world thought to ask, that a life is measured less by its length than by everyone it refuses to let go of. If this journey through Okinawa moved you, like this video and subscribe to Hidden Nation TV. There are more hidden nations still waiting to be discovered